The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
Welcome to Face Off, where we debate the issues of the day from the left and from the right. We're joined by Alan Stock of KXNT Radio and Maria Teresa Lieberman of Battleborn Progress. So let's start off with the state of the state and get just your main takeaway from last night's State of the State speech with Governor Sisolak.
Well, it was an ambitious state of the state, needless to say. He proposed a lot of new programs, adding to existing programs, things that will cost a lot of money. Some of the things I like, other things I have some concerns about. What he didn't say was where the money's going to come from. He did say that we're not going to raise taxes, so obviously I like that idea a lot. We're not going to raise taxes.
I thought you might.
I liked it a lot. And I had a hunch. You know, he's got a business background. He's much more economically conservative in a lot of ways. So, but he said he wouldn't raise taxes, which is fine. My question is, where is he going to get the dollars for some of these programs? I mean, some of these things he talked about, 44 million plus for preschool development, which I'm not sure how relevant that is given the history of preschool development, increasing the state's wage for people who work for the state, and many, many other things. I'm just wondering where he's going to get the money for some of this, and what programs will be cut, and what expenditures will be, and what programs will be eliminated.
And what did you think of it? There was a lot for Democrats to like in there.
Yeah, and as a progressive and someone that has been, you know, if you told us 5 years ago with, or, you know, last session or the session before that, that we would have a governor that is saying state employees can now collectively bargain, we're going to take proactive measures to have common sense gun legislation, especially since October 1, and also name-dropped Planned Parenthood and talked about women's health and how that's going to be part of the health care work that he's going to try to do, and not separate, because women's health is health care. And all of those things plus more were just, it was great to hear that, and that he led with that and was very forceful about those things. So we're excited to see what he's going to do, and that, you know, he had, like you said, an ambitious agenda, but I think it's ambitious because we need it. Nevada needs these different policy areas that he talked about last night.
It was very popular with the audience because obviously the majority of people there were Democrats, and they appreciated what he had to say. He got a lot of applause, but again, it was his audience, his constituency he was speaking to. His issue with guns was very interesting because one, he had talked about the idea of expanding background checks, and we know that question 1 was flawed. So, I mean, if they find a way around it, I personally, I'm not a big opponent of background checks. I've gone through a lot of background checks in my life, certainly with guns also, and CCWs and the like. So I'm not a big opponent of that. He would talk about bump stocks. I don't care that much about bump stocks. I don't want it to be the camel's nose under the tent, so they start going after other things. But again, some of the things he said were okay, and I think will pass the legislature this year. He, in the past, has mentioned, quote-unquote, assault weapons, and I talked to him about that the Friday before the election and asked him to define it. And no one in this country has ever defined, really, assault weapons. So I'm hoping that they stay away from that and just go after some of the other things that he talked about last night.
Yeah, well, actually, they did define assault weapons in the assault weapons ban, which enabled gun manufacturers to get around it with some cosmetic changes and a few little things there that didn't really, so it basically undercut the law the more narrowly.
That's why it doesn't work. I mean, you know, you're right, they can change some cosmetic things and all of a sudden it's a little bit different. The issue is not guns. One thing that I was a little bit concerned about, he did talk about the idea of giving teachers raises and spending more money for education, and let's throw spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, and that's fine. My concern, though, and I mentioned this to him also on the Friday before the election, the biggest concern I have with schools is the safety of schools. And he did talk about using marijuana money to be able to enhance the safety of schools. He didn't define that, though, last night, what he would do about it. Putting more cops on campus was what he talked about that also, and having more counselors in there to counsel kids who may be troubled. That's all fine. The bottom line, though, is this. If you really want to stop the problems of school shootings buildings and those types of issues, you have it so all campuses are closed except for 1 or 2 entrances. I mean, I've harped about that many times in this show, on my show, and elsewhere. But that is the only thing that will prevent and guarantee that nobody will get into that school. He didn't mention that last night, and I'm hoping that'll be part of his agenda.
Yeah. In terms of some of the things he promised, he talked about a 3% raise for state employees, 3% raise for teachers. He talked about collective bargaining for state employees, although he didn't put a date on it. He didn't say we're going to do it this session. He said he wants it to be done, and it's consistent with what he said on the campaign trail. He also talked about prevailing wage for public works. Raising the minimum wage, affordable housing. So there are a lot of things in there that are going to cost the state more money, especially the collective bargaining and the prevailing wage. That's going to drive up the cost. So really the question is he going to have enough money to get all these things done?
I think that's something that has to be worked through the legislature. And now that it is out there, I think it behooves us, the constituents, and I know that groups like ours are going to be there to hold him and everyone else accountable to be able to do the things that we all want to do, because these are all things that we need, and we all want to make sure that we have the money to do it. So I think we just have to reprioritize where the money is going to. I think for many years and many sessions we can agree that we haven't prioritized education enough, that we've prioritized other things, and I think that's sort of what he's trying to tell us, is that it needs to be reprioritized to education and making sure our public employees, our teachers are being paid fairly, and all of the other programs and funding that he wants. I think it's more of a reprioritization that we need to do.
Yeah, Alan mentioned one of the things that he wanted to see in the speech and didn't see, and that's how exactly he's going to protect schools. Was there anything that you wanted to see in the speech that you didn't see in there?
I think I would have wanted maybe a little bit more detail on immigration, but I think that is something that just him highlighting Daisy from in his speech and having people recognize that we have young people like that deserve to be protected, honestly, because they are Nevadans just like all of us. I think that was great. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more on immigration, but he has a good stance on immigration. I think there was probably just more he wanted to get done.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about Washington, D.C. We saw William Barr, a familiar face to those of us who are a little bit older, come back to campaign for his old job to be Attorney General. Had the hearings. I guess, is there a worry that he is going to be like Jeff Sessions, or do you think he's going to be different from Jeff Sessions?
I think he may even be a little bit worse than Jeff Sessions, just because I think he's going to be someone that is going to be a yes man to Donald Trump, honestly, based off of, what he believes with executive authority and different things like that. I think, Trump is trying to put in more yes men, and until proven otherwise, that's what he's going to keep doing. And so I'm not excited to see him as our Attorney General. I wasn't excited about Jeff Sessions either. There's just no good people that he's putting up for any of these roles.
Well, we agree on Jeff Sessions. Let me say that, for a lot of reasons. But Barr was AG once before under Bush 1. So, I mean, he has had the experience in doing that. He was very clear in his comments that they're not going to go after first-time offenders and small-time users of drugs and everything like that. He was very, very clear about that, which Sessions was, on the other side about. I think that the whole issue of marijuana in general is going to be coming up in the next year or so. During this presidency, during his first term before he's reelected, I think we're going to wind up seeing some issues out there having to deal with it, because so many states have so many different viewpoints on marijuana, so many different laws. We've got to get something stable across the board, which means the federal government. And I think that Barr will be on board with something like that. At least that was the indication situation. I think he's much more even keel than Sessions. He's more experienced in doing something. Again, he's had the experience. I don't think he's going to be a yes man. I don't think that Trump's got anyone in there that's really a yes person. And you know, when you and I all know, when he gets ticked off at somebody, he starts railing at them, which I don't really like him to do this in public, not in the least bit. But he's done it, and so he's had a big, you know, turnover in folks working for him like that. I don't think Barr's going to be a yes man at all.
Well, we also have this is a good question because we have an actual young person on the stage today. We've got some politicians and presidential candidates who are trying very, very hard to be cool. Beto O'Rourke, I think we all saw this. He went to his dentist and had a selfie video made at his dentist. I personally thought way too much information. I don't need to see inside a candidate's mouth. Elizabeth Warren was drinking a beer online. So I guess, and we'll start with our resident young person. Does this, do they connect with younger voters when they do this, or does it just fall flat?
I think, you know, I think it's interesting to see that, especially since social media is playing a role in this. I think they're trying to use social media to seem cool. I think, you know, I think I like the idea of them doing that. The dentist may be a little bit much.
I was going to say.
The beer, okay, because, you know, that usually it's kind of, especially for female candidates, it's, you know, you never should be around, be seen drinking or, you know, having alcohol. So I think that's a little step forward, because I do think that at the end of the day, candidates should be a little bit more relatable, or should try to seem a little bit more relatable. Someone who did this very well, and it would be interesting now with social media, was George Bush the second. He was, you know, great. People wanted to have a beer with him. It'd be, you know, and I think that's what people are trying to do now on the Democratic side, is they're trying to play up that relatability. Does it fall flat? I think for people younger than me, it may. But, you know, for me, it's all right. I like it. I do want them, though. I want to see more of that. I think especially the older generation of the Democratic Party needs to be a little bit more relatable to the young people that many of them feel like they're being left behind or not being heard.
Yeah, well, Alan, we remember that famous photo where Ronald Reagan dropped by the pub and was hoisting I think it was a Guinness. I could be wrong about the brand, but that seemed to make him relatable. But he was an old man at that time. So what about these candidates? I mean, you know,
George W. Bush, I think was much more comfortable doing that. Hey, let's have a beer together. Yeah.
Although George W. Bush was a teetotaler by the time he got to the White House.
By the time he got in the White House, he was. But he had that attitude even when he got to running for office. He was a teetotaler. He was clean and sober. But he still had the relaxed attitude. I had the chance to meet him in April of 2000 in New York at an event, and he was a very relaxed guy. And again, he was not drinking or doing drugs or anything like that, but he was a very relaxed guy. He came across that way, and it was natural. Okay, let's just be honest, Pocahontas, right? I mean, she puts the video on. She starts to talk. She goes, "Oh, wait a minute," and then she goes away, and there's nothing going on for that. I don't know how long in the video. Then she comes back with a beard. She goes, "Well, look at me. Look how cool I am," and she's in a glugget. Okay, Beto. Let's talk about Robert Beto. Beto, when he came across the stage in one of his appearances in a skateboard, I mean, okay, that showed his he was young and cool and like that, right? But with the dentists, I mean, do you want to see this guy having a colonoscopy going, hold on a second, folks, do you really want to see it? I mean, nobody wants to see any of that stuff. That is, most of it is not cool. It's not professional. It's not mature. And while some immature kids who are 16, 17, and even 18 might be turned on by some of this, I don't think that, that Elizabeth Warren nor Beto did themselves any good by doing either one of these things. The folks who you're talking about who are older in the Democrat Party and Republican Party who are more mature have evolved over the years, and they've had success being mature, paying attention, and having a sense of, how am I going to say this, like je ne sais quoi. And I go back to people like JFK. I go back to people, and I was around when he was there because I'm older here, and so JFK, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton even going on the stage at Arsenio Hall and blowing that sax with those shades on. I mean, he looked cool. He really, and you know what? That appealed to a lot of young people without looking stupid. You know, like the dentist thing or the chugging the beer. He looked cool, whether you like him or not. He looked cool that night on Arsenio Hall. Take a cue from what has worked, and if you're trying to break new ground, be careful about it. And if your advisors are telling you to do these things, change advisors.
Maybe it's a thing, you know, like Alan said, Bush was natural. Yeah. When you're trying to do something like play the saxophone, if you actually play the saxophone in real life, that will seem natural, that will seem cool. But if you're, for example, John Kerry, and you go to the cheesesteak place and you ask, can I get Swiss on this cheesesteak? It's obvious he has never consumed a cheesesteak before in his life, and it just falls flat.
Yeah, I do agree with the part that it's got to be natural. It's got to be something that makes you who you are. And at the end of the day, I agree. If your advisors are telling you to do something that isn't natural to do, just to try to look cool, yeah, change advisors or just ignore them and be cool by ignoring them, because that, you know, whether you're young, old, people at the end of the day do want to see you be natural in who you are. And another person that did this but still was very straight-laced was Barack Obama. I think, you know, he had a certain likability of him, but I think him not trying too hard to be cool also made him kind of cool. You know, so it's stick to what works for you as just a human being.
I'm not a big Obama fan, you are well aware of that, but you're right. He was more natural in his ability to be able to be cool. You know, he was like a Joe Cool. I mean, he came across much better than O'Rourke and Elizabeth Warren. When I met George W. Bush, it was at a talkers convention in New York, and he had given us a keynote speech, and then we all went into another room and we got to meet him. He came through and he met us all and shook our hands. Well, I was wearing one of my typical loud Hawaiian shirts and a jacket, and he came through and he greeted me, "Hi, I know, how are you?" You know, and we shook hands and said hi, nice speech and everything, and he started to walk away, and he was about 7 or 8 feet away. He turned around, came back, and he went, "I like that shirt of yours, by the way. That's really a cool shirt." You know, I mean, it was very natural the way he did it. It impressed me at the time, and so I voted for him, of course.
Well, I'll tell you, when I run for office, I will eat a cheesesteak, and of course, I will get it with Cheese Whiz, as one must.
There you go.
All right, so last topic. I have here the 23-page opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel. Don't worry, I'm not going to read it.
Thank you.
About the reevaluation of the Wire Act. Essentially, does it prohibit internet gambling in general? We know it prohibited sports gambling, but does it prohibit internet gambling? In 2011, the office said it does not, so internet gambling is okay. Now they've reevaluated that and said, no, wait, it does. So internet gambling is now in jeopardy. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and so I'm not going to try to make a personal judgment on this, but I can say that with the differences in opinions in 11 and now what's going on, eventually I think this is going to have to reach the Supreme Court to make a decision on it with you know, minds that are more legally wise than certainly mine. So it's hard for me to take a stance on it. I personally have no issue with internet gambling. It's going to happen. It's already happening on various levels right now. So, I mean, if it's going to happen, we've got to regulate it and make sure it's done right. But eventually, it's going to have to go to the Supreme Court, let them make the decision, and then we'll abide by it, however it is.
Yeah. What do you think? A complete change of position in just 6 years, 7 years?
Yeah, and in those few years, in the last few years, we've also seen a lot of states with the internet age and things like that, especially if they have lotteries or certain other, you know, statewide gambling like that. They have used the internet to that. You know, they sell lottery tickets online. You can just play it online now in many states. And so a lot of states that have made their own decisions to have gambling legal through the internet, or, you know, do the lottery through the internet, now they're questioning what's going to happen. So I agree, it's going to end up in the Supreme Court, you know, because a lot is at play at this, and it's going to, a lot of states now have to figure out how they're going to work under this new decision. And so we're going to see it up in the Supreme Court. And I think because the internet, especially with net neutrality and many other issues, and people that work in the internet not wanting to be so policed, regulated, sure, but not policed to the point where you're making things illegal, are going to play a role, and it's going to be a big fight.
Yeah.
Let me say one quick thing, going back to a topic we talked about earlier, because we talked about this before we went on the air, and that is Steve Sisolak. I just want to say he is probably the most emotional governor I've ever seen in my life. He is. No, and I say that from a very positive point of view. I mean, he wears a lot of his emotion in his sleeves. Yeah. I thought maybe he was going to cry, during part of that, but. Of all the governors we've had since I've been here, and even when I was in California, I don't remember anyone who had that true sense of true, authentic emotion, and I respect him for it. I think he's a very genuine, authentic guy. I like him personally, and in the areas that I agree with him on, I wish him success. For those that I don't, I hope he fails, obviously. But well, I'm just being honest. But as a person, I think he's a hell of a nice guy. It's
going back to the natural thing. He wasn't trying to be something he wasn't up there.
Exactly. That's exactly. He's Mr. Cool without even trying to be cool.
Yeah.
One more question on the Wire Act. Something of a conspiracy theory. Now, this opinion makes clear that the reevaluation came as a result of a question from the criminal division of the Justice Department. But there are a lot of people who say one of President Trump's big supporters, Sheldon Adelson, who's been a vehement foe of internet gambling, may have had something to do with this. Do you think there's anything to that?
I really have no idea, and I don't want to really speculate because I don't know. Sheldon Adelson owns, resorts here, gambling resorts, and overseas as well. I think that ultimately, if it's legalized, and I think ultimately it will be, I really do. I think when that happens, I think Sheldon and all the other folks who own resorts will wind up benefiting from it big time. I mean, the idea that we can't have a lottery here as an example, I always thought was kind of foolish, because if the resorts were smart, they would say, let's go for it, and you can buy the tickets from inside of our resort as well, and we'll make money on that.
Right in the middle of the casino.
Yeah, how many people are going to really would get a lottery ticket and say, I'm not going to gamble at slot machines or anything like that. If you're oriented to going to a slot machine or sitting down at the table for blackjack or whatever the case happens to be, you're going to do that anyway. It's an additional source of revenue, I think. Ultimately, if it's legalized, Sheldon's going to benefit much more than I will.
What do you think? Do you think Sheldon had anything to do with this?
I don't have any proof, but I wouldn't be surprised. And it's funny because if he is, it's funny that a businessman is getting in the way of business, because at the end of the day, this is a business, and this is the form of capitalism that people have figured out a new way to provide people something that they're inclined to do. And if you don't like it, Sheldon, then why don't you figure out how to get in on it?
Good. Supporting capitalism. I love that. I love that. That's good.
It's interesting. In Nevada casinos opposed gambling in California at Indian casinos vehemently, right up until they struck management deals with those casinos.
And now they're part of those casinos.
Precisely.
I was never for the idea of necessarily allowing casinos on Indian land, because I think that it was a violation of really what the intent was to have gambling here, and all of a sudden it's like these individual independent Indian lands all of a sudden start gambling. But it happened, and you're right. A lot of the resorts here we know have partnered with those folks there, and I've stayed at one of those places up in the Sonoma County area, and it was very, very, very nice.
All right, there you go. You got a review of the Indian casinos from Alan Stock. Well, thank you both. Alan Stock from KXNT, Maria Teresa Lieberman of Battle Born Progress. We appreciate you being here, and we will see you next week on Face Off.
Thank you.
Thank you.